The most powerful moment in a woman's life is not when she discovers she was betrayed. It is when the world realizes she never needed the person who betrayed her. The ballroom of the Grand Aurelia Hotel shimmered beneath thousands of golden lights, where crystal chandeliers reflected across marble floors and conversations moved like a quiet river through the most influential names in New York. It was supposed to be a celebration of love, success, and a future carefully planned. But while everyone watched the elegant reception unfolding before them, no one noticed that the most important decision of the night was happening far away from the dance floor. Brielle Hartman stood inside a private executive suite overlooking Manhattan, a single fountain pen resting between her fingers. On the table before her was a document worth $1 billion. The final agreement that could transform her financial technology company into one of the fastest-growing firms in the country waited for her signature. Her emerald dress reflected softly against the glass walls, not as a symbol of luxury, but as a reminder of the woman she had become. Calm, focused, unshaken. Across town, Harrison Caldwell, her husband of 9 years, was standing beneath the same golden lights of the wedding reception, but not beside his wife. The millionaire CEO of Caldwell Capital was surrounded by applause as he stepped onto the dance floor with Vanessa Whitmore, the woman everyone believed was only a business associate. The music began. Guests smiled. Cameras captured the moment. Harrison looked confident, almost certain that he understood exactly how the night would be remembered. He did not know that while he was creating a memory that would follow him for years, Brielle was preparing to sign a future that had nothing to do with him. Their story had once looked perfect from the outside. The powerful CEO and the brilliant woman who stood beside him through every difficult season. Before the luxury cars, the penthouse views, and the billion-dollar conversations, there was a young couple who believed they were building something together. Brielle had believed in Harrison before the world knew his name. She had supported his ideas, challenged his plans, and encouraged him when success seemed far away. She never wanted the spotlight. She simply believed that partnership meant building side by side. But somewhere between corporate victories and private celebrations, Harrison began forgetting the difference between having someone beside him and having someone behind him. Now, on the most public evening of their lives, he was dancing with another woman while believing Brielle was still waiting for him to choose their future. The irony was something only fate could write. Because Brielle was not waiting. She was deciding. Inside the quiet executive suite, her legal advisor placed the final page in front of her. "Once you sign, this partnership becomes official," she said. Brielle looked at the signature line. For years, her name had appeared beside Harrison Caldwell's as his wife. Tonight, it would appear alone as the founder of something entirely her own. Her phone showed a message from the reception coordinator asking if she was ready to return downstairs. Brielle looked once more at the city lights beyond the window. Then she lowered the pen, not with anger, not with regret, with certainty. While Harrison danced beneath the chandeliers, believing he was choosing a different future, Brielle Hartman was signing hers. Before the world knew Harrison Caldwell as a millionaire CEO, before his company occupied the highest floors of a Manhattan tower, there was a small office with old furniture, unfinished ideas, and two people who believed they could build something together. Brielle Hartman remembered those days clearly. She remembered Harrison sitting across from her at a crowded coffee shop, explaining his vision with the kind of passion that made impossible dreams feel almost realistic. He did not have a powerful title then. He did not have investors waiting for his next move. He only had determination, and Brielle believed that was enough. She became the person who saw potential before success arrived. When Harrison created the first version of Caldwell Capital, Brielle was there reviewing presentations, organizing research, and helping him understand the communities he wanted to serve. She was never interested in being introduced as the woman behind a successful man. She believed they were partners walking toward the same destination. For years, that belief felt true. Their first apartment was small, but their dreams were large. They celebrated every milestone together, from their first major contract to the opening of their first office. Harrison used to tell people that Brielle was the reason he never gave up. He called her his greatest supporter. He said she understood him better than anyone. But success has a way of changing the way some people remember their own story. As Caldwell Capital expanded, Harrison's world became filled with board meetings, private events, and powerful connections. The company grew from millions to hundreds of millions. His name appeared in business publications. Invitations arrived from people who once ignored him. Slowly, the woman who had stood beside him became someone the world only saw in the background. Brielle noticed the change in small moments. Conversations interrupted by phone calls. Important decisions discussed after they were already made. Events where people introduced Harrison as the genius behind the company while overlooking the years she spent helping him build it. Still, she remained patient. She believed difficult seasons could pass. She believed marriage was not measured by perfect days, but by the choice to continue showing up. Harrison, however, began seeing their relationship differently. He started believing that his success belonged only to him. The more recognition he received, the more distance grew between the man he became and the woman who remembered who he used to be. Vanessa Whitmore entered his professional world during a period when Harrison was surrounded by attention and admiration. She understood the image he wanted to protect. She admired the success, the influence, and the reputation. What Harrison failed to recognize was that admiration was not the same as loyalty. Meanwhile, Brielle was quietly building something of her own. She had spent years studying financial technology, understanding markets, and developing ideas that she had once placed aside to support Harrison's ambitions. She never announced her plans. She never demanded recognition. She simply prepared. On the night of the wedding reception, as Harrison stepped onto the dance floor believing everyone was watching him, Brielle's journey had already reached a different chapter. The world saw a millionaire CEO celebrating his victory. But the truth was more complicated. The woman standing quietly in the background had been building a future he never imagined. Harrison thought he was the one creating the next chapter of their story. He did not realize Brielle had already started writing her own. The ballroom continued to shine as if nothing had changed. Music filled the air, guests smiled beneath the crystal chandeliers, and the celebration continued around Harrison Caldwell as he moved across the dance floor with Vanessa Whitmore. To everyone watching from a distance, it looked like a moment of confidence and success. But behind the elegance of the evening, a different story was unfolding. While Harrison believed he controlled the image everyone would remember, Brielle Hartman had already discovered the truth. Earlier that night, before entering the reception, Brielle had received the final confirmation from her investment team. The billion-dollar agreement she had spent years preparing for was ready. It was not a sudden opportunity. It was the result of countless early mornings, difficult decisions, and ideas she had quietly developed while the world only saw her as Harrison's wife. Inside the private executive suite, Brielle reviewed the final pages with Elena Pierce, her trusted legal advisor. The room was calm compared to the noise downstairs. There were no cameras, no expectations, and no need to pretend. Elena looked at Brielle carefully. "Are you certain you want to sign tonight?" Brielle looked through the glass window at the city lights. "I have spent years waiting for the right moment to build something of my own. I do not want someone else's choices to decide when my future begins." Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, Harrison and Vanessa continued their conversation after the dance. Vanessa smiled as guests admired the scene. "After tonight, everything will become easier," she said quietly. Harrison looked toward the crowd, confident that his plans were finally coming together. He believed Brielle would eventually accept the reality he had created. What he did not understand was that Brielle was no longer waiting for him to make a decision. She had already made hers. As the evening continued, Brielle received a message from Marcus Ellington, the investor who had believed in her vision from the beginning. The final approval was complete. The partnership was official. A billion-dollar agreement that carried her name was now real. She placed the phone down and looked at the document one more time. Years ago, she had signed papers beside Harrison when they built their life together. Tonight, she was signing something that represented her own identity. The contrast was almost impossible to ignore. In one room, a man was celebrating a relationship he thought he could control. In another, a woman was creating a future he could not influence. Brielle returned to the ballroom only after the documents were complete. She walked through the entrance wearing the same calm expression she had carried all evening. No one noticed that the most important moment of the night had already happened. Harrison glanced toward her when she entered. For a brief second, their eyes met. He smiled, assuming she was simply returning to continue the celebration. Brielle gave him a polite nod and moved toward Elena. There was no confrontation, no public scene, no need for words. Because Brielle understood something Harrison had forgotten. The strongest decisions are not always announced. Sometimes they are made quietly, with a signature, a steady hand, and the courage to choose yourself. While Harrison danced beneath the lights, believing he was protecting his future, Brielle had already secured hers. The music eventually faded, the guests slowly began leaving the ballroom, and the golden lights of the Grand Aurelia Hotel reflected across a night that would change two lives forever. Harrison Caldwell remained surrounded by conversations, handshakes, and familiar faces. To everyone around him, he looked like the same confident millionaire CEO who had built an impressive empire. But behind that image was a truth he did not yet understand. The woman he believed would always stand beside him had already chosen a different path. Brielle Hartman returned to the private executive suite after the reception ended. The room was quiet now, almost peaceful compared to the celebration below. On the table sat the signed agreement, a symbol of years of preparation and patience. Elena Pierce gathered the remaining documents while Brielle looked at the city outside the window. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Elena asked. Brielle took a slow breath. "I have been ready for longer than anyone knows." She thought about the years when people introduced her only as Harrison Caldwell's wife. She thought about the meetings where her ideas were ignored because they came from someone standing beside the CEO instead of sitting at the decision table. She remembered every moment she chose patience because she believed loyalty was a strength. But loyalty without respect could slowly become a place where a person disappeared. That night, Brielle did not leave the hotel as a woman searching for answers. She left as a woman who already knew her value. The next morning, Harrison woke up expecting a normal conversation. He expected Brielle to return home, to ask questions, and to eventually accept the explanation he had prepared. He did not expect the quiet message waiting for him. A formal request for separation. A review of shared financial arrangements. A clear statement that future communication would be handled with professionalism. Harrison stared at the message longer than he expected. For the first time, the situation was not following the plan he created. He called Brielle immediately. She answered after several rings. "Brielle, we need to talk." Her voice remained calm. "We have already talked, Harrison. You just did not know I was listening." Silence filled the line. Harrison searched for the right words. He wanted to explain the pressure, the confusion, the circumstances that led him there. But every explanation sounded smaller than the truth. "I never wanted to hurt you," he finally said. Brielle looked through the window of her apartment, where the morning sun touched the buildings across Manhattan. "Intent does not erase impact," she replied. "And promises do not mean much when actions keep saying something different." Harrison closed his eyes. For years, he had negotiated billion-dollar decisions by studying risks and outcomes. Yet he had failed to understand the most important thing he possessed. Trust could not be purchased, managed, or rebuilt with a simple apology. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Brielle looked at the folder containing the agreement she had signed the night before. "Now I build the future I should have started building years ago." She ended the call without anger, without bitterness, without needing the final word. Later that afternoon, news quietly spread through financial circles that Brielle Hartman had completed a major investment partnership. People who once recognized her only through Harrison's achievements began searching her name for another reason. They discovered a founder, a strategist, and a woman who had been preparing for her own moment long before anyone noticed. Harrison still had his company, his reputation, and his wealth. But for the first time, he faced a reality he could not negotiate away. The person he underestimated was no longer standing in his shadow. She was stepping into her own light. For the first time in years, Brielle Hartman woke up without checking someone else's schedule before checking her own. Her mornings had once been organized around Harrison Caldwell's meetings, flights, and corporate events. Now, her calendar belonged completely to her. The apartment was quieter than the penthouse she had shared with Harrison, but it carried something the luxury home never gave her: freedom. On the corner of her dining table sat the first official documents of Hartman Financial Solutions, the company she had spent years developing quietly while the world only saw her as the wife of a millionaire CEO. The billion-dollar partnership had opened a new chapter, but Brielle knew the signature was only the beginning. Success was not created by one contract. It was built through every decision that followed. Over the next several months, Brielle worked with a focus that surprised even the people closest to her. She met with investors, studied market changes, and built a team that shared her vision. She did not want to create another company that measured success only by numbers. She wanted to build something that respected innovation, responsibility, and the people behind every business decision. Elena Pierce watched her transformation closely. "You know what is different about you now?" Elena asked during a late afternoon meeting. Brielle looked up from a stack of financial reports. "What? You are no longer trying to prove that you belong in the room." Brielle smiled slightly. "Because I finally understand I was always supposed to be there." Those words represented everything that had changed. For years, Harrison's world had made her question whether her ideas were valuable. Now executives waited for her opinions. Investors studied her strategies. People who once overlooked her name were learning it. Meanwhile, Harrison Caldwell continued leading Caldwell Capital, but the company was facing challenges he could no longer ignore. Several projects required restructuring, and investors began asking difficult questions about future direction. The confidence that once defined Harrison became harder to maintain. He still had resources. He still had influence. But he no longer had the certainty that everything would work simply because he wanted it to. One evening, Harrison found an old photograph inside his office drawer. It was from the early days of Caldwell Capital. Brielle stood beside him outside their first small office, holding a folder of business plans while Harrison smiled at the future they imagined together. He stared at the picture longer than he expected. He remembered the woman who believed in him before anyone else did. He remembered the ideas she offered, the sacrifices she made, and the encouragement she gave when success seemed far away. The realization was uncomfortable because it was undeniable. He had spent years chasing recognition while ignoring the person who helped him become worthy of it. Across the city, Brielle was preparing for a major presentation with Marcus Ellington, one of the most respected investors in New York. Marcus had not invested because of her story. He invested because of her ability. That difference mattered to Brielle. She did not want people to support her because they felt sorry for what happened. She wanted them to respect what she created. The night before the presentation, she stood by her apartment window watching the city lights. The same skyline that once represented Harrison's success now represented possibility. She placed her hand on the folder containing her company's future plans and smiled. The world had changed, but the most important change had happened inside her. Brielle was no longer rebuilding a life someone else damaged. She was building one that had always belonged to her. 1 year after the night, everything changed. Brielle Hartman stood beneath the lights of the New York Financial Summit, looking across a room filled with executives who once would not have known her name. The stage behind her displayed the logo of Hartman Financial Solutions, a company that had grown from a private vision into one of the most talked-about financial technology firms in the country. The audience was waiting for the announcement that would define the next chapter of her career. Across the room, Harrison Caldwell had arrived as well. He was still recognized as a millionaire CEO, still respected in many circles, but the confidence surrounding him had changed. He no longer entered rooms believing he owned every conversation. He listened more. He observed more. The world had quietly taught him lessons he once refused to learn. When Brielle walked onto the stage, the room became silent. She wore a deep blue tailored suit, simple jewelry, and the calm expression of someone who no longer needed approval. The host introduced her as the founder and chief executive officer of Hartman Financial Solutions, the woman leading a billion-dollar partnership that had changed the direction of the industry. Harrison watched from his seat as applause filled the room. He remembered another version of Brielle, the woman who sat beside him at small dinners when his company was only an idea, the woman who reviewed his plans late at night, the woman who believed in him before the world did. He had spent years thinking her support was evidence of his own greatness. Now he understood it had been evidence of hers. During her speech, Brielle did not mention Harrison. She did not mention betrayal. She did not mention the night that changed everything. Instead, she spoke about vision, discipline, and the importance of recognizing talent before the world notices it. The greatest opportunities are often hidden in places people overlook, she said. Sometimes the person standing quietly beside you is the person who understands the future before anyone else can see it. The words were simple, but Harrison felt their meaning. After the presentation, investors gathered around Brielle. They asked about expansion plans, new markets, and future projects. She answered with confidence, not because she wanted to prove something, but because she had earned her place there. Later that evening, Harrison found himself standing near the entrance as Brielle prepared to leave. For a moment, he considered walking away. Perhaps he believed he no longer deserved a conversation. But he finally approached. Brielle. She turned calmly. Harrison. There was no anger in her voice. That somehow made the moment more powerful. I watched your presentation, he said. You built everything you talked about years ago. Brielle looked at him for a moment. I built it because I believed in the idea, not because I needed anyone else to believe in me. Harrison nodded slowly. He wanted to explain all the things he regretted, but some apologies became smaller when spoken too late. I was wrong about you, he said. I thought I was the one building the future. Brielle held his gaze. You were building yours. I was waiting too long to build mine. The honesty of those words stayed with him. There was no bitterness, no desire to make him feel smaller, only truth. As Brielle walked away toward her team, Harrison remained near the entrance, watching the woman he once underestimated receive the recognition she had always deserved. The world had not changed because she defeated him. It changed because she finally stopped measuring herself through someone else's success. For the first time in many months, Harrison Caldwell entered a room where Brielle Hartman was not the person standing beside him. She was not introduced as his wife. She was not recognized because of his company. She was simply Brielle, the founder of a billion-dollar financial technology firm. And that reality forced Harrison to confront something he had avoided for too long. A week after the New York Financial Summit, Harrison requested a meeting. Not at his office. Not at a luxury restaurant where appearances could influence the conversation. He chose a quiet corner of a private business lounge in Manhattan, a place where two people could speak without an audience. Brielle arrived exactly on time. She carried a small folder, but she did not open it. She had learned that not every conversation required preparation. Some required honesty. Harrison stood when she entered. For a moment, he looked like the man she had known years earlier, before success changed the way he saw the world. Thank you for coming, he said. Brielle nodded. You said it was important. Harrison sat across from her, searching for words. The old Harrison was skilled at negotiations. He knew how to convince investors, close deals, and control difficult conversations. But this was different. There was no contract to sign, no strategy to present, only the truth. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what happened, he said. Brielle remained quiet. For a long time, I told myself that things became complicated because of pressure, because of business, because I was trying to manage too much. He paused. But those were explanations. They were not excuses. Brielle looked at him carefully. This was the first time she had heard him separate the two. I made choices that hurt you, Harrison continued. I stopped seeing you as my partner and started seeing you as someone who would always be there no matter what I did. The honesty in his voice was different from the apologies she had expected months earlier. There was no attempt to make himself the victim. No request for sympathy. You were the person who believed in me before anyone else did, he said. And I treated your support like it was something I was entitled to receive. Brielle lowered her eyes for a moment. She remembered the beginning of their relationship. The small apartment. The handwritten business plans. The nights when they dreamed about the future together. She also remembered the moment she realized she had become invisible inside the life she helped create. Harrison, she said quietly, the hardest part was not losing the marriage. It was realizing that the person I trusted no longer saw me clearly. He accepted the words without defending himself. That was the difference. Once, he would have searched for a reason. Now, he simply listened. I am sorry, he said. Not because I lost something valuable, but because I failed to recognize something valuable while I had it. Brielle studied his expression. She wanted to believe that people could change. She had built her own future on that belief. But forgiveness did not mean returning to the same place. I hope you become a better man, Harrison, she said. But my healing cannot depend on who you become. He nodded slowly. I understand. Outside the window, Manhattan continued moving. Cars passed. People walked through the streets carrying their own stories. Brielle stood and picked up her folder. There was no anger between them anymore. Only the understanding that some relationships end not because love disappears, but because people become different versions of themselves. As she walked toward the exit, Harrison remained seated. For the first time, He understood that regret was not a way to bring the past back. It was a responsibility to become better in the future. And for Brielle, the greatest victory was not seeing him regret losing her. It was realizing she no longer needed him to. Several months after their conversation, Harrison Caldwell faced the most difficult decision of his professional life. Caldwell Capital remained a respected company, but the Harbor District Development Project had reached a critical point. Rising costs, changing regulations, and concerns from local businesses created challenges that required a new direction. For years, Harrison had believed success meant having complete control. Now he understood that leadership was not about having all the answers. It was about recognizing the right people when they had them. The name that kept appearing in every discussion was Hartman Financial Solutions. Brielle's company had become one of the strongest firms in the market, and investors believed her approach could bring stability to the project. The irony was impossible to ignore. The woman Harrison once underestimated was now the person who could help protect the future of the company he had built. When Brielle's advisory board reviewed the opportunity, opinions were divided. Some believed this was the perfect moment to gain complete control over Caldwell Capital's difficulties. Others believed business decisions should remain separate from personal history. Brielle listened to every perspective before making her decision. "We are not here to punish anyone," she said. "We are here to create something valuable." Her words reflected the person she had become. She no longer measured success by proving someone wrong. She measured it by building something meaningful. The final proposal from Hartman Financial Solutions was clear. They would invest in the project, restructure the development strategy, and create a stronger partnership between the company and the surrounding community. The agreement included opportunities for local businesses, responsible growth plans, and long-term investment in the area. It was not a rescue. It was not revenge. It was a professional decision based on value. When Harrison entered the conference room to review the proposal, he expected a difficult negotiation. Instead, he found Brielle sitting across from him with confidence and composure. There was no bitterness in the room. Only two business leaders discussing the future. "You could have made this much harder for me," Harrison said after reviewing the terms. Brielle looked at the documents in front of them. "I could have." He understood the meaning behind her answer. She had the opportunity to use his mistake against him, but she chose not to. "Why?" he asked. Brielle looked at him calmly. "Because I am building a company based on my values, not my emotions." Those words stayed with him. Years earlier, Harrison had believed emotions were weaknesses in business. Now he saw that integrity could be a strength. The contract was placed on the table between them. Harrison picked up the pen and looked at the signature line. It was a simple moment, but it carried a meaning neither of them ignored. The woman he once believed was only part of his story was now shaping the future of his company. He signed the agreement. Brielle reviewed the final page and added her signature beside his. There was no celebration, no dramatic announcement, just two signatures representing a new balance between them. After the meeting ended, Harrison watched Brielle leave the room surrounded by her team. She was not walking away as the woman he lost. She was walking forward as the woman she had become. And for the first time, Harrison understood that the greatest consequence of his choices was not losing control of his company. It was losing the chance to stand beside someone whose vision had always been greater than his own. 2 years after the night that changed everything, Brielle Hartman returned to the Grand Aurelia Hotel. The same entrance welcomed guests beneath the same golden lights. But the woman walking through the doors was no longer the person who had once entered believing her marriage would last forever. Tonight, she arrived as the founder of Hartman Financial Solutions, a respected business leader whose decisions shaped the future of companies across the country. The hotel ballroom was filled with familiar faces, including investors, executives, and community leaders who had watched her journey unfold. This time, people did not recognize her because of who she married. They recognized her because of what she built. Brielle paused near the entrance for a moment, remembering the last time she stood in that building. She remembered the music, the celebration, and the painful realization that the life she thought she had was changing. But memories no longer controlled her. They were simply reminders of how far she had come. At the center of the ballroom, a charity foundation was honoring leaders who created meaningful change through business. Brielle was one of the featured guests. She stood beneath the lights wearing a simple black evening gown. carrying herself with the same quiet confidence that had defined her journey. Across the room, Harrison Caldwell watched from a distance. He was no longer the man who believed success gave him the right to overlook the people who supported him. His company had changed. His leadership had changed. Most importantly, he had changed. But he understood that some changes happened after losing something valuable. When Brielle finished speaking on stage, the audience applauded. Her message was not about betrayal or the past. It was about courage, responsibility, and the importance of recognizing potential before the world notices it. The greatest achievements are not created by standing above others, she said. They are created by building with people who believe in something greater than themselves. Harrison listened quietly. He knew those words represented everything Brielle had always been. After the event ended, he approached her near the hotel entrance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them was no longer filled with anger. It was filled with understanding. "You built something incredible," Harrison said. Brielle smiled slightly. "We both built something." He looked surprised. "We did. You built your company," she replied. "I built myself." The words were not meant to hurt him. They were simply true. Harrison nodded slowly. He had spent years believing losing Brielle was the result of one mistake, one moment, one decision. Now he understood it was a series of choices that taught him what truly mattered. "I am proud of you," he said. Brielle accepted the words with a calm expression. "Thank you." There was no promise of returning to the past. No attempt to recreate what was gone. Some chapters end because they have completed their purpose. Outside the hotel, the city lights reflected across the streets of Manhattan. Brielle stepped forward with her team beside her, carrying the confidence of a woman who had discovered her own strength. Harrison watched her leave, not with bitterness, but with respect. The woman he once underestimated had become someone the world admired. She did not win because he lost. She did not rise because he fell. She rose because she finally understood that her value was never determined by the person standing beside her. The wedding reception had been the night Harrison thought he was choosing a new future. In reality, it was the night Brielle began creating hers. And years later, she walked away from that same place knowing the greatest agreement she ever signed was not a billion-dollar contract. It was the promise she made to herself.